Good afternoon. Welcome. My name is Stephanie Kirk. I'm the director of the Center for the Humanities here in Arts and Sciences at Washington University in St. Louis. It's my distinct pleasure to welcome you all, both those of you who are here in person, those of you who are tuning in virtually, to one of our signature events, our annual faculty book celebration, where we celebrate the outstanding scholarship and creative practice of our colleagues in the humanities and humanistic social sciences. For those of you who've had a chance to check out our book display here, or a marvelous book display we have online, you'll have seen the great bibliodiversity of the work of our faculty, the great range of topics and plurality of approaches and methodologies. This all stands as a testament to the vibrancy of our fields, our research, and our creative work. These books take in huge slices of historical periods, focus on global, national, and local topics. Contrary to what people believe, books help guarantee the health of the academy and how we engage and communicate with the multiple publics that read our work. And today is a chance to really celebrate these authors and the difficult but rewarding journey they took to produce these important publications. After the event, there will be a reception, and I hope everyone can join us to keep the festivities going. We are also raffling the book of our keynote speaker, so check out the screen at the end of the event to see if you have the lucky winning tickets. Before we get to our keynote, we will hear briefly from two of our faculty authors who will discuss their recently published work. And I'm going to start us off by asking Angela Miller, Professor of Art History and Archaeology and author of a book displayed here, to introduce our first faculty speaker, Ila Sheren. Thanks, Angela.
Hi, good to see everyone. I'm Ila Sheren's colleague in art history and archaeology. And Ila's been teaching there since 2013 in the field of contemporary art and new media in the 21st century. She completed her PhD at MIT and then came to us. And I want to say something about the field of contemporary art because it's a challenging field that Ila is engaged in. Far more than other subfields within art history, contemporary art in the era of the Anthropocene is organized around global circuits of exchange and broad planetary impacts that now take precedence over the nation state as an organizing principle. Ila's work spans a range of emerging media and issues of urgent importance. Her 2015 book, Portable Borders, Performance Art and Politics on the U.S. Frontera since 1984, is engaged with how the persistent nation-state politics of borders have opened into transgressive practices. Her recent collaborative work, Moving Stories in the Making, which is now on view at the Luminary here in St. Louis, that show features the narratives of global migrants as they struggle to form bridges to their new communities. Ila's most recent book, about which we're going to hear more shortly, is called Border Ecology, Art and Environmental Crisis at the Margins. And this work pursues the environmental turn that demands our attention ever more pressingly. Border Ecology addresses how contemporary artists around the globe have engaged digital, video, and time-based media to capture the multiple pathways and actors shaping the unfolding environmental crises of our present moment. This vibrant, new, but also very old turn toward the agency of the non-human world, object-oriented ontology, as it's called, this vibrant new turn finds a place within Ila's complex force field of objects as actors which carry a material impact on the environment. Border Ecology, however, moves beyond new materialism to incorporate decolonial perspectives that have, in recent years, come forward in many areas of the humanities. Decolonial approaches analyze the unequal access to political and cultural power in a world ravaged by centuries of Western colonialism. Such approaches allow an understanding of the current environmental crisis in ways that are fully informed by very localized and specific histories of colonialist extractive industries and by the structural inequities that have shaped uneven access to resources, generating profound divisions between rich and poor nations. Bringing together the materialist and the decolonial, border ecology also returns to a central term in Ila's scholarship, which is the border, now focused, however, on epistemological rather than physical border zones, productive new sites of inquiry that braid together the human and the non-human, the natural and the political, as these come together to shape our world. Thank you, Ila.
Thank you. Thank you, Angela, so much for that generous introduction. It's an honor to be your colleague, and I've appreciated it all these years. And I also want to thank the Center for Humanities, for the staff and faculty who've made this event possible, Alicia, Kathleen, Laura, Stephanie, Talia. I mean, it's wonderful to work with you all over the years. Thank you for inviting me to speak about this weird little book that I wrote under the pressures of a tenure deadline and the desire to take a break from the work in the US-Mexico borderlands that has otherwise defined my career. So as an academic studying contemporary phenomena, I felt a pressing need to contribute to the literature on climate change. In 2014, 2015-ish, as I was conceptualizing this book, there was a great deal published in other disciplines, but eco-art history was still coalescing, mostly under the direction of art historians like T.J. Demos and Linda Weintraub. Thus, the book began in dialogue with their work, but primarily with the field of new materialism or object-oriented ontology that Angela mentioned. For those not familiar, this was a multi-pronged effort to account for the agency of objects, animals, what Richard Grusin termed the non-human turn. Yet the focus on objects erases the histories of human inequality and uneven development. It leaves out how the subjugation of human populations parallels that of the environment. I was not the first to point this out, but I wanted to offer a concrete methodology for holding these factors in tandem. I was drawn back to the literature on coloniality and decolonization, the border thinking of Walter Mignolo, whose work had informed my approach to performance art in the US-Mexico borderlands in my first book project. Border Ecology, this book, indexes my attempt to decolonize new materialism, to read these theoretical perspectives through each other, following physicist and gender theorist Karen Barad's methodology laid out in their 2007 book, Meeting the Universe Halfway. So here I'm going to quote myself just once, because I can, on the conjunction between border thinking and the object-based materialism of the non-human turn. And then I'm going to show you pictures, because I'm an art historian. And I quote myself, decolonizing sensitivity tempers the radical decentering of new materialist thought, an acknowledgement that human histories of inequality and structural imbalance do, in fact, matter and have lasting effects on the object-driven landscape presented in these images. Consideration of the non-human, on the other hand, gives another dimension to border thinking, expanding its reach beyond that of the human border subject or Mignolo's anthropos. Instead, my combined approach encompasses a rich spectrum of border dwellers. A border ecology, then, finds these new connections to make, not just between humans and non-humans, objects and things, but between different modes of thinking about these objects. Because border ecology looks at art from the margins, as well as the gaps, disjunctures, and interstitial spaces within a given piece, it changes the terms of the conversation and enables a decentering of narratives of victimhood and objectification, rather than their erasure. So again, you're not here to get into the weeds on this, so here's some art. There we go. And again, I'm an art historian. I would be in a dark room with absolutely no light, and you would see this beautifully, but we'll be here. So this image is actually what set me off on part of this journey. It's a photograph from South African artist Gideon Mendel's Submerged Portrait series, which is part of a larger series titled Drowning World. Mendel travels around the world to sites of flooding and photographs locals in front of their dwellings. You can see that across places like the UK, Nigeria, and other sites. Again, these are just a tiny sample of his broad-ranging practice. I do a reading of this series and his related series, Floodlines, which focuses on interiors and objects, in relation to Rob Nixon's theorization of slow violence, as well as Jane Bennett's vital materialism. Note the emphasis on objects throughout flood lines, the commonality, the clocks, right? And of course, you can see what he's doing here, drawing connections, using the emotional and physical heft of water as a leveling device, right? Floods affect us all. We're all in this together. But I kept returning to Chintra and Samundri Davi of the photograph on the right, in part because their location is one I know. And this is the part that's not in the book because, right, it doesn't enter into the peer-reviewed manuscript, but it speaks to how lived experience informs our work. And so why not? So this is a lovely map of that region of India, and Muzaffarpur is the city that village is near. And I travel to this region all the time. There's me when I was young and cute. But yeah, that's me with several of my in-laws in a village that isn't far from the one depicted in Mendel's work. That's my uncle-in-law's land. The mustard fields can be otherworldly in winter. I asked him about the Great Flood of 2007 from the image, and he said he didn't remember it. 2003 was a bad one, he said, but everyone had to go up on their roofs for a long time, people were displaced, but 2007 was just a normal flood year, because floods are part of the agricultural cycle and displacement is expected. The concern he had wasn't flooding, but drought. That's the key indicator of climate change in the region. Mendel's work isn't actively misleading, after all. Displacement due to floods is a massive public health issue, among others, but drought is the real catastrophe. The lens of an outside photographer naturally creates narratives of victimhood and objectification, while the reality is perhaps too complex and not visually dramatic enough to capture in an image. One more example. I spend a whole chapter on this work, and it's the one where I develop my methodology to fruition. So I'll just touch on it here, but if you want more, we're having a roundtable at the Kemper on March 20th titled Toxic Sublime Art in the Climate Crisis, so save the date. Manthan is an 11-minute video performance referencing Hindu mythology and contemporary pollution in the sacred Yamuna River, which runs through Delhi, but continues on through significant pilgrimage sites until it meets the Ganges. And here's another image from the video in which you can see the large clumps of effluents that are traveling down the river. Analyzing Manthan from this border ecology perspective, we learn not only why it's not a paradox for a sacred river to be polluted to the point of death, but why Galhotra's depiction of the polluted river can upend a long-standing trope in eco-critical art, that of the toxic sublime. Here's French photographer Zachary Rabelais' take on the same river. Still mingling the sacred and the polluted, Rabelais' lens is here a documentary one, maintaining its distance from the figures and not venturing as critical a stance as does Galhotra. She, as an Indian citizen and resident of New Delhi, undertakes a kind of self-analysis through Manthan. The film is aesthetically pleasurable in keeping with the toxic sublime discourse, but steeped in larger discourses about the political utilization of the sacred. Galhotra can do this because she comes at the subject from within. Stating this risks essentializing her, but to reorient this dilemma in terms of border ecology reveals that this position is not limiting, but profoundly liberating. Rabelais' image reads not as a critique of religious priorities, but as a study in contrasts, the veneration of an ancient religion undercut by the toxic byproducts of industrialization. The social and the material are here juxtaposed, but not read through each other. Galhotra's film, on the other hand, gives an entry point to discuss environmental crisis as both materially and discursively constituted in an escalating feedback loop. So that was the major argument presented in the book, but I would be remiss if I left out the fact that it also is rooted in digital media studies. The artworks I discuss range from digital photography and video to interactive internet art and web-based documentary. I trace a lineage of digital media back to 1960s eco-conscious work in the early days of the computer age. I argue that digital media is itself a border discipline, one that is well suited for the work of visualizing a border ecology. There's other work that this book could have done or could have tried to do. I didn't get to engage as directly with indigenous studies, for example, which is the clear trend in our subfield now. I wanted to avoid tokenism and to avoid speaking for those who are more than capable of articulating their position, and probably most importantly, the artists that I study are firmly rooted in the Western tradition of art making, even those who live and work in the global South. So to conclude, by comprising and envisioning what I've termed a border ecology, eco-art as a genre can succeed as placing viewers within that larger matrix of human, non-human, and institutional actors, deprioritizing the human while heeding the long-standing effects of social, cultural, and economic inequality is a delicate balancing act, one that requires the assistance of non-humans and, as I've argued, the knowledge gleaned at the borders. So I want to thank everyone for listening, and I want to congratulate all of you who are celebrating their book publications today. It is an immense accomplishment, and I hope that you take time to really kind of step back and celebrate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ila. I'm going to ask Kit Wellman, Professor of Philosophy and Interim Chair of Jewish, Islamic, and Near Eastern Studies, to introduce our second faculty speaker, Hayrettin Yücesoy. Thank you, Kit.
So I'm keenly aware, we good? I'm keenly aware that no one is here to listen to me, so I will very, very briefly just say that the initial reviews of Hayrettin's most recent book, Disenchanting the Caliphate, confirm that it is groundbreaking work and the monumental achievement of a mature scholar. So on behalf of everybody at Jimes, we're extremely proud of you and just so happy for you. So let's hear from Hayrettin.
Dear students, esteemed colleagues, and visitors, thank you for joining me and us here. I'd like to thank the Center for the Humanities, Stephanie, Alicia, Talia, and Laura for organizing this fantastic event. And it's a distinct honor for me to address all of you here about something that I have struggled with for a number of years, and obviously, like any other, the people of the book in this room that know that it is both a joy and also an emotional swing. So I am also grateful, obviously, to my interim chair, Kit, for his introduction. So Disenchanting the Caliphate is about the value of secular political languages in the histories of Muslim peoples. It takes a critical stance toward the discourse of Islamic political thought, quote unquote, and the over-religionization of intellectual history. It focuses on a remarkable discourse of good governance and political temporality in a foundational period in their histories. In contemporary scholarly and public discourse, there exists a prevailing belief that the histories and cultures of Muslim peoples are predominantly shaped by religious beliefs. Statements such as Islam is a way of life, or assertions that Islam does not distinguish between state and religion, often underscore this assumption. Additionally, there is the claim that the ulama, that is, religious scholars, have represented Muslims and held the authority to speak for the tradition. My book challenges this view. I contend that political thought traditions in the Caliphate world diverged into two competing and dialogic political rationalities in the 8th century. Let me actually just do this. The religious governance of the ulama in what I term imamate discourse, and the secular politics of lay bureaucrat literati elaborated in the discursive tradition of siyasa. Each one of these foundational ideas authorized a distinct conception of political power, shaped the similar political subject, and enabled divergent ways of life. In the chapters of the book, I substantiate the main argument through an elaboration of 5 core themes: sovereignty, political virtue, law, territoriality, and imperial subjectivity. As a form of governmentalization of religion, the imamate was grounded in Islamic normative values, signifying the governance of the caliph, who is presented as holding both religious and secular authority, which is the most common notion that those who know anything about the caliphate would recognize. It anchored governance to the prophetic dispensation of Muhammad, advocating the enforcement of religious laws and the pursuit of a pious dutifulness as sufficient conditions for virtuous social order. Given its arguments and the foundation on which it was built, the discourse of imamate may be characterized as the ulama's political theology. I point out that the imamate had been the only available language to make sense of political reality until siyasa emerged as its contestant in the mid-8th century. As a counterpoint to the idea of the imamate, siyasa was elaborated by a class of subaltern lay bureaucrat literati who launched a discussion of politics in secular prose writing as another discourse of constituting and representing the caliphate. In reacting against and relativizing the governance of the imam, the proponents of siyasa intervened from two directions. First, they foregrounded the idea of governance as an endeavor distinct from the practice of religious piety. They conceptualized governance as a craft of building satisfaction through the rational and practical calculation of contingency in consideration of the outcome. Second, they opened a new field of deliberation in which temporal political moralities were expressed and elaborated. Since the common narrative of secularism is both modern and Eurocentric, my work presents a case that encourages a rethinking of the history of secularity, not as a European exception, but one that is observable in distinctive ways in global history. The far-reaching implications of the discursive dialogue and contestation between these two foundational visions over the course of history was profound. The dialectic between them not only shaped the political practice of the quote-unquote golden age of the caliphate, but also left a lasting impact on political thought currents across societies from Bengal to the Balkans to the Gibraltar, extending into the era of millennial sovereigns in the 16th century. Thank you for listening to me. And actually, it was a nice transition from materialism to conceptual history ideology. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to our faculty speakers. And now I'd like to turn the mic over to Dr. Chris Scheberg, Director of the Program in Public Scholarship, great friend and collaborator of all of us here at the, well, not here, but all of us over there at the Center for the Humanities. And he's going to introduce our guest speaker, Professor Nicole Seymour. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephanie. Thanks, everyone, for being here. Back to materialism. Okay. On a recent evening after dinner, we were all lounging around the living room. Lego blocks and books were strewn around, the cat was stretched out beneath the coffee table, and some couch cushions had been repurposed for a floor is lava game that my kids were playing. I hadn't done the dishes yet, and the task was weighing over me. At one point, my 4-year-old daughter, Vera, ran up to me with a big, mischievous smile, showing me that her cheeks were covered with glitter. Where the hell did that come from? I got down on my hands and knees and started searching furiously for a tipped-over jar or an open envelope of the stuff. Maybe it came from a piece of junk mail? Then I noticed Vera over in the corner, behind a chair, rubbing her face furiously in her shirt. She ran up to me again and proudly revealed what she'd figured out. Her entire face was freshly awash in even more glitter. It turns out that glitter was indecipherably on her shirt, embedded in a pattern or an image. I hadn't even realized it was there. But once Vera discovered it, She also knew somehow that it was removable and that it could adhere to not just the shirt, but to her skin. She had unlocked a secret power. The next day I would ponder all this as I attempted to wipe up every last flashy punctum off our wood floor, not exactly winning any achievement badges. My point in telling this little story is that Vera had stumbled upon many of the swirling meanings that inform the topic of our keynote talk this afternoon. Our guest, Nicole Seymour, is a professor of English at California State University Fullerton, a leading thinker in the environmental humanities, and author of the books Strange Nature and Bad Environmentalism. I just love those titles. Seymour's third book, Glitter, was published in a series that I founded and co-edit called Object Lessons. As our tagline goes, these books explore the hidden lives of ordinary things. Glitter indeed hides as much as it displays and shines, as the aftermath of my daughter's spontaneous performance showed. Attachment, tackiness, glamour, subversiveness, waste, indeterminate aesthetics, and, why not, the future of the planet, or at least our species being on it. It was all crystallized in my quaint domestic scene. One of the most enjoyable parts of editing Object Lessons is when an author comes to us and says, I've been working on a topic for years, now I know how to focus it. Thanks to the simple constraints of our series, 30,000 words, a simple cover image, many authors have been able to wrangle what was otherwise too tentacular, dispersed, or capacious. Nicole's book, Glitter, is just such a case. The prose is sprightly and journalistic, while taking the reader down unexpected paths and into sudden, scintillating insights. Emmanuel Levinas once wrote, "Infinity overflows the thought that thinks it." Today I want to adapt Levinas a bit for our purposes. Picture this. Glitter overflows the thought that thinks it. Such is the vibe of Nicole Seymour's brilliant work on the subject, at once more superficial and deeper because it is grounded in the material. I'm eager to learn about the latest traces of glitter and where they lead us. Please join me in welcoming Nicole Seymour.
When people are watching me, I become unable to use a computer, so this is really, really kind that someone is doing this for me. Thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to try to keep myself to the promised time of 40 minutes, or maybe even less. So here goes my stopwatch. Okay, thank you all again for being here. I also want to thank Laura, Meredith, and Alicia for their planning help. And speaking of Alicia, there is a large print copy of my talk. If anyone wants an accessible script, pop over there. And thank you to Chris and Ian Vagost for welcoming me into their Object Lessons book series. And congrats to the other authors. I was saying earlier, this is like Scholastic Book Fair for adults, and this is really, really fun. So obviously, I'll be talking about my glitter book today, but I'm also going to offer a broader context for my work, institutionally and pedagogically as well. To orient you, my talk will have 4 parts of varying lengths, and I'm just going to jump in with part 1 of the 4 parts, which is Doing Poor Queer Studies, ? As Chris mentioned, I teach at Cal State Fullerton, which is located on Tongva, Kizh, and Achaman indigenous lands. Fullerton has the most students of all the 23 Cal State campuses, one of which my lower middle class parents attended, and which together make up the largest public university system in the United States. Cal State Fullerton is a quote-unquote Hispanic serving institution and a quote-unquote Asian American and Native American Pacific Islander serving institution. It has been ranked number 2 in the nation for graduating students of color and number 1 in the nation for social mobility. Despite these notable features, Cal State Fullerton remains, to use scholar Matt Brim's phrase, one of the, quote, overlooked places where the production of queer knowledge takes place, end quote. So just to illustrate this from personal experience, on at least 3 occasions, my affiliation has been listed in a program or on a name tag as UC Fullerton, as in University of California, the research university system, whereas the Cal States are the teaching university system. And people routinely ask me, even in California, where Fullerton is. And the answer is kind of close to Disneyland, which is where a lot of our students work. So who cares? And what does this have to do with glitter? Well, I actually read Matt Brim's book, Poor Queer Studies, after I finished the glitter book. And given that the glitter book is deeply informed by queer studies approaches, I felt compelled to engage his argument that, quote, the field of queer studies has been and is still defined by the immense resources of the institutions of higher education that most steadfastly refuse to serve representative numbers of poor students, end quote. And I feel likewise compelled to think through how my work might in some tiny way contribute to what he argues for, which is, quote, a reorientation of the field away from its prestigious and well-known institutions and toward working poor and working class people, places, and pedagogies, end quote. And I cannot promise I will achieve anything approaching reorienting the field today, but if Brim is right, then even a gesture in that direction would be meaningful. So what I want to do for the rest of my time is to demonstrate how thinking about glitter can be a way of thinking about class and race in addition to sexuality and environment. And tackiness, as you see in my title, will be my organizing concept for doing so. Okay, so part 2, the great glitter backlash. Picture it, 2017. I had just finished the manuscript for my previous book, Bad Environmentalism, which charts alternatives to gloomy and doomy killjoy environmentalism, when a particular news story began circulating in the US and UK media. The story goes something like this. Glitter consists of non-biodegradable microplastics, so pieces less than 5 millimeters in diameter, and therefore pollutes the environment, especially the ocean. This type of glitter, along with myriad other microplastics, sorry, I'm behind on my slides. Okay, sorry. This type of glitter, along with myriad other microplastics, gets washed down sinks or shower drains and escapes the filters of washing machines and heads to the ocean. There, microplastics can both absorb and release chemicals, while plankton, fish that eat plankton, and other organisms can ingest those particles. While the ultimate consequences of microplastic pollution are still unknown, it does not bode particularly well for the health of aquatic ecosystems, nor that of humans who might eat fish sticks, for example. In light of these trajectories and their possible risks, New Zealand environmental anthropologist Tricia Fairley initially sounded this alarm, quote, I think all glitter should be banned because it's microplastic, end quote. She told media outlets on November 16th, 2017. The headlines proliferated, as you can see. And in fact, this news story seemed to take on qualities of glitter itself. It was ubiquitous and inescapable. And this backlash has resurfaced like clockwork for the past several years since, culminating, one might argue, in the sweeping ban on microplastics implemented by the European Union last year. Loose plastic glitter, such as for arts and crafts, was banned immediately as of October 17th, 2023, and various milestones such as its removal from makeup and nail cosmetics will follow in the next decade. But while I definitely agree with the spirit of the ban and the ban itself, I think this larger backlash against glitter deserves some scrutiny. For one thing, despite Fairley's rather matter-of-fact statement, not all glitter is microplastic. There are many biodegradable and non-plastic alternatives. And as it turns out, glitter does not actually seem to be a major source of microplastic pollution. Various studies estimate that it constitutes from as little as 0.1% to as much as 1% of the overall total in the ocean, with scientists reporting little evidence of hazardousness. The vast majority of microplastics in the ocean actually come from, I gave a roundtable earlier today. Let's see if anyone was listening. What are the most microplastics coming from? Clothing. Yeah? Okay, yeah. Yes, just checking. Sorry, I should have given you more space. So yeah, 35% clothing actually produces the majority of microplastic pollution. And also car tires. So synthetic rubber obviously is coming off the tire and washing into the oceans. And yet, we don't hear stories about clothing, or at least not viral stories like this. So in the book, I survey various explanations for this apparently disproportionate backlash against glitter, ranging from the continuing dominance of killjoy environmentalism to the lucrativeness of clickbait journalism, to the fact that glitter is typically associated with marginalized identities and subject positions, including children, girls, women, feminine people, drag performers, queer people, transgender people, and people of color. categories that, of course, overlap in various ways. Those identities and subject positions have been associated with devalued conceptual categories such as frivolity, waste, and aesthetics, so art or indulgence, over ascetics, austerity, or self-discipline. As literary scholar Daniel C. Remine puts it, quote, "The command not to decorate encodes a blend of racism, misogyny, and homophobia." He recounts, for example, modernist critic and designer and sexual abuser Adolf Loos's claim that, quote, "The evolution of culture is synonymous with the removal of ornament from utilitarian objects," end quote. And this is from an essay called, unbelievably, Ornament and Crime from, I believe, someone can correct me, 1928, I think. Excuse me. In other words, respectable, read white culture, is defined by simplicity and restraint rather than decoration. To connect all the dots then, the environmentalist or pseudo-environmentalist bias against glitter could be said to encode or at least serve homophobic, transphobic, misogynist, effeminophobic, racist, nationalist, xenophobic, fascist, and classist values. At best, it is unsympathetic to how important glitter has been materially as well as symbolically to marginalized communities. And in fact, one of the things I'll try to show in just a moment is how glitter's tackiness, that is to say its physical cleanliness as well as its showy or gaudy vulgarity, might be reconceived as critical tactic rather than environmental hazard at worst or pesky irritant at best. Or perhaps irritation itself might be a critical tactic as well, as we're about to see. So I'm going to read here a bit from chapter 2 of Glitter. The Great Glitter Backlash is chapter 1, if you're trying to follow along with the table of contents back there. So chapter 2 of Glitter focuses primarily on the role of this substance in activist demonstrations around the world, including Mexico, the US, and Scotland. All of these examples I cover play off of audiences' love it or hate it relationships with glitter, while also exploiting its unique physical properties and cultural associations, including those two meanings of tackiness. So, to Mexico first. Mexican writer Jorge Volpi explains that in the 4 years leading up to an unprecedented series of protests starting in August 2019, femicides in Mexico increased by 150%, while almost all rapes and cases of harassment or trafficking have gone unpunished. Indignation and anger should be shared by all citizens, he argues, but it has been women, and particularly those under 25, who have finally dared to mount the only one visible resistance to an order that not only allows but encourages violence against women in vulnerable groups such as girls and the LGTB plus community, end quote. This movement, to which Volpi refers, quickly became known as La Revolución Diamantina, or the Glitter Revolution, so called because a protester doused the security minister of Mexico City, Jesus Orta Martinez, in pink glitter at the initial protest on August 12, 2019. This tactic was picked up in subsequent actions over the next several weeks, which spread to 16 Mexican states. And I should note in a US context, glitter bombing might seem kind of passé because if people remember, it had a moment in the US in like 2010. But as this example shows, and the examples I talked about in Scotland, actually I don't have time to talk about them today, but they're in the book. This tactic kind of gets like revived every few years, so it still has this continuing life. The aforementioned glitter bombings exploit the unique qualities of this substance, including clinginess or tackiness, persistence, dispersibility, visibility, and irritation. Those things just so happen to be also political goals. Consider, for example, clinginess and persistence, or again, what we might call tackiness in the literal sense. One of the Mexican protesters' slogans was, "The women you murdered will not die," the obvious implication being that the protests would ensure the persistence of their memory. Similarly, feminist collective Luchadoras promises on their website, La Diamantina no se borrará, or the glitter will not fade. Glitter's dispersibility, due to its lightness and relatively small size, also means that it exceeds control in multiple ways. It refuses to be contained, spreading across multiple sites, just as protesters flood through streets, take over freeways, swarm and occupy buildings. Glitter also symbolizes political activism itself, insofar as individual acts make little difference compared to the power and the joys of collective action and resistance. No one bit of glitter is glitter, and this is true on the most basic of etymological levels. So as a collective noun, glitter has multiplicity built into it. So I've been suggesting that glitter can be read as a metaphor or inspiration for political goals, but it can also literally or materially enact those goals. For example, protesters make themselves extra visible as feminine and or queer through the use of glitter. For protesters and others of color, visibility may be particularly meaningful. Consider the comments of Quill Lemons, a young black queer photographer from the US, whose Glitter Boy photo series focuses on young men of color, including young black men. As he observes, quote, "There's a privilege that comes along with being white when it comes to self-expression, sexuality, and fluidity. Black men really don't have that, so this project was designed to bring light to boys that get overlooked," end quote. These comments resonate with art historian Krista Thompson's description of how photography privileges whiteness, not just in the sense that historically only white people have been deemed worthy of representation, but also in terms of how actual photographic technologies render black and brown people illegible. Glitter, as a substance that typically reflects light, is a small tool with which to change these circumstances. But back to our protesters. In addition to securing their own visibility, glittery protesters ensured that their targets cannot easily forget their demands, thanks to their chosen material's clinginess and persistence, or again, tackiness, which is caused in the first place by static electricity and surface tension. As US activist Nick Espinoza stated of his decision to glitter bomb homophobic politician Newt Gingrich in Minneapolis in 2011, and this is actually, like, as far as I know, the first glitter bombing of its kind, which sparked many more. He said, quote, "I knew that it would stick with him," so tackiness again, right? "And that for days to come, he'd be remembering what I said as he pulled the glitter sparkles from his hair." And what Espinoza had said was, "Feel the rainbow, Newt. Stop the hate. Stop anti-gay politics." These glittery actions can be said to exemplify what scholar activist Emery Starr has called tactical frivolity, in which activists reflect back in the form of the protests the absurdity of the policies and institutions in power. So examples range from gay activist Tom Higgins serving anti-gay campaigner Anita Bryant a pie in the face during a 1977 press conference, which you can see in the bottom left corner, to Texas's 1993 Moon the Klan event when 5,000 Austinites greeted a busload of white supremacists with their bare or barely clothed butts. In these examples, playfulness doesn't minimize hatred or violence, but it does show them to be ridiculous, not to mention a lot less fun than their alternatives. Further, the frivolity of these performances can, at least figuratively, disarm and disorient the opponent, who might have come expecting a more militant response. Beyond ideological aims, tactical frivolity has practical benefits. Performance studies scholar and activist Ellen Bogad claims that, quote, "To recruit new members and grow the movement, protest actions should be attractive or charismatic. Even if the issue is deadly serious, the time spent and the physical movement through space should inspire desire and defiant joy," end quote. So, we know now how glitter works ideologically and emotionally as a political tool. But how does it work logistically on the ground? I'm going to turn here to queer Hungarian artist and troublemaker Bambi van Balen, known for designing and displaying inflatables in protest actions. There's actually a Mexico City connection here, which is that Bambi van Balen mailed climate protesters an inflatable hammer that they could, so it was very lightweight, right? It was easy to make and send to them, and then they blew it up and carried it for their protests. So Van Balen explains that acts of tactical frivolity do at least two important things. Number one, providing an iconic meme for the media, which they connect to the principle, do the media's work for them. And number two, forcing authorities into a decision dilemma, which they connect to the principle, put your target in a decision dilemma. Meaning not only that they must make a decision based on your actions, but that all their available options play to your advantage. So in the interest of time, I'm just going to focus on number two here, the decision dilemma. And I think its application to glitter bombing goes something like this. Given glitter's association with feminine and queer people, if the male target, and glitter bombings are almost always male and cisgender, if the male target ignores the glitter, he allows himself to be marked with this sparkly substance and thus risks looking feminized or queered. and therefore too much like the bomber from whom he presumably wishes to distance himself. On the other hand, if the target reacts with disgust or phobia, such as by furiously attempting to brush the glitter away, he thereby proves the bomber's implicit charges that he is misogynist, homophobic, or, in the case of columnist Dan Savage, who was glitter bombed by trans activists, transphobic and homonormative. And given the impossibility of fully cleaning up glitter, because again it's tacky, the target will also look inept and powerless as he tries to rid himself of this substance. If police or security drag the glitter bomber away, as happened with the person who glitter bombed US politician Rick Santorum in 2012, or if the target presses charges later, as did US politician Mitt Romney after being glitter bombed, also in 2012, it was a big year for glitter bombing, the target may appear hysterical or thin-skinned, and therefore, again, feminized or queered. It's probably worth recalling here that when Nick Espinosa chose glitter for his action against Newt Gingrich, he did so in part because, as he said, glitter was lightweight and wouldn't be construed as violent. Other glitter bombers have reported that they were careful to choose glitter that had pieces large enough that it could not be inhaled or get into targets' eyes or airways. So here we start to see the many sets of paradoxes around glitter that I try to chart throughout the book. Is glitter useless, or is it a tool? Is it harmless, or is it dangerous? The competing answers to those questions have very real implications, especially when we consider, for example, the overcriminalization of protests that has led to skewed definitions of violence. And indeed, 2 anti-pipeline protesters in Oklahoma were charged with a quote-unquote terrorism hoax a few years ago, stemming from the glitter that fell off of a banner that they unfurled at an energy company's headquarters. Such treatment lends a grim gloss to the bombing part of glitter bombing, an otherwise playful concept. Let us consider here the words of Mexican activist Sandra Aguilar Gomez, who is frustrated that the Mexican media harped on the defacement of the Angel of Peace monument back in Mexico City in those Revolución Diamantina protests. Quote, "They can't see the pain in the faces of the mothers and sisters of murdered women and the raped women and the harassed women, but they are very, very empathetic with this lady made of stone," end quote. So something similar, I think, is happening when we harp on the relatively negligible environmental effects of glitter rather than contextualizing them within the larger pictures of feminist, queer, anti-fascist, and other activisms. And now is probably a good time to mention that instructions for eco-friendly homemade glitter, namely that made from sugar, circulated on social media networks during the Revolución Diamantina protests. When we also take into account the aforementioned strategizing around the choice of glitter, so as we heard before, it's lightweight, people also chose the kind with large pieces, etc., we could argue that glitter bombers, at least in some cases, have demonstrated care for the environment as well as care for their targets. Homemade glitter is also cheap, economically speaking, as is plastic glitter. This cheapness constitutes another of glitter's fundamental properties / politics. For one thing, cheapness matters specifically for glitter bombing. The act is seen as accessible and adoptable because glitter is cheap and easy to obtain, or at least it was before October 17th, 2023 in Europe. Not to mention that it is easy to conceal, so you can smuggle glitter into an event, right? And that glitter bombing actions are easy to film and share on social media. Further, glitter's cheap and easy character has enabled the quote-unquote tactical diffusion of glitter bombing, as a tactic's flexibility and ability to be easily emulated will have a positive influence on its adoption. And there I'm quoting from sociologist Anya Gali. The economics of glitter is political in other senses as well. Consider how the plastic glitter backlash I described earlier has extended to Carnival, which has its roots in the communities of enslaved African peoples in Brazil. While some entrepreneurs have developed low or no plastic glitters for Carnival, many participants report that they're too expensive. Expressing her skepticism about the environmental impact of glitter, celebrant I don't know how to say this name, sorry, Angelica Nobrega told a reporter, quote, "It is just one more thing to make the lives of Brazilians difficult. I think they are making it up," end quote. While Nobrega may be factually incorrect, I want us to take her sentiments seriously. That is, some perceive the glitter backlash as classist or even racist, not just homophobic or misogynist. Plastic or homemade glitter may be cheap, but can everyone afford to quote-unquote go green? I think we must also consider here the idea that glitter and other shiny things have long served as accessible shortcuts for the poor or as a means to reverse power hierarchies. Think, for example, of how England's Queen Elizabeth I legislated in the 1500s against the lower classes, wearing items such as, many people know about these laws, wearing items such as shiny metallic threads, because doing so would supposedly cause disorder and confusion about class distinctions. There were also some foreign trade issues at hand that I won't get into. So these were the famous sumptuary laws, and I'm just running them here in the background just to skim because they're pretty entertaining. So that was a general one, and this was about women's apparel in particular. In this way, art history student Molly Mapstone told me, I should say, I gave a lot of talks on glitter before I published the book, and I had really great comments from grad students and audience members, and I just ended up throwing them in the book. So Molly Mapstone told me that she thinks of glitter as economically subversive. Quote, "Formally and materially, it is reflective and iridescent, like other more expensive materials, gold, diamond, silver. It possesses the same effects without the cost." Of course, if glittery, shiny things have become correlated with the poor rather than the elite in contemporary times, they can become further stigmatized. That is, while the public once met glittering things with admiration or aspiration, they might now meet them with suspicion and disdain. As Captain Charles Moore, discoverer of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, states, quote, "At some point in the post-war era, plastics," which again glitter sometimes is, but not always, "plastics stopped seeming cool and new and began seeming false and tacky," end quote. So this brings me to the task of thinking through the relationship between the term tacky, as in clingy or adhesive, which we know glitter is, and the term tacky as in cheap, showy, vulgar, or trashy, which glitter also arguably is. So I found out in writing this book there is no clear etymological link between these two versions of tacky. They come from different places, the words. But in this case, I think they come together. And I should also say I was disappointed that the word tactical is also not related, because I have this section is called Tactical Tackiness, and I was like hoping it would all come together, but it doesn't. It doesn't come together. Okay, but tacky and tacky, I'm forcing them together. Glitter clings or adheres to bodies, and those bodies, especially if they're classed and are raced in particular ways, may then get stigmatized as cheap, showy, gaudy, vulgar, or trashy, including in the environmentalist sense. Think, for example, of the anxieties of Mariah Carey's backup singers and best friends in the fine film Glitter, which I had to watch for this book. A Black woman and a Latina woman, respectively, as they prepare to dress up in shiny clothes for a big event. "You look like a disco ball," one says to the other. "It goes with the hoops," she replies. "It's too much," the first concludes. And this is from a different scene, but I just thought this was a great image. It's too tacky, in other words. In her work on Black and Latina, quote-unquote, aesthetic excess, gender studies scholar Jillian Hernandez explains these internalized standards. Quote, "Racialized and hypersexual femininity in particular has served as a denigrated prism through which the superiority of authentic, truthful, and natural/simple, parentheses, white styles have been asserted," end quote. Interest in the shiny, colorful, and glittery, in other words, may mark one as backwards or inferior by dominant Euro-Western standards. So we're right back there with Adolf Loos. But asserting interest in shiny stuff, nonetheless, may challenge or at least defy those standards. We might consider here Krista Thompson's work on how urban African diasporic communities, quote, "disrupt notions of value by privileging not things, but their visual effects," end quote. While Thompson is referring to practices such as wearing bling and not glitter specifically, I think the same point holds. While glitter may be tacky in both of the ways I just described, clingy as well as gaudy, the worth of the material itself is less important to users than its visual, affective, symbolic, and other effects. Those effects are political in and of themselves, and as I hope to have indicated, play crucial roles in political actions. Okay, I need water, so give me a second. We're moving right along. This is just really snappy. Okay, part 4, teaching froth and frivolity. So I'm going to try to link everything together here. So as you will recall from the first part of my talk, Matt Brim was calling on queer studies scholars to think toward working class pedagogies. And I tried to do some of that thinking last semester when I taught queer literature and theory at Cal State Fullerton. Specifically, I taught excerpts from my glitter book in conjunction with Black Scottish author Shola von Reinhold's 2020 novel Loat. This is not a quiz, but has anyone read this by any chance? Yes, okay, yay. Oh my gosh, someone just rubbed their hands together with glee. So honestly, this is the best novel I've read in 20 years, and I'm a literature professor. And there was a period of time last year when I felt very strongly that my main purpose in life was to evangelize this novel to people. So I'm taking this platform. And I've started some new work on it, which I'm happy to talk about later. Okay, so again, I know I'm throwing a lot at you today. I think the spirit of gaudy, tacky excess has captured me, and I can't help myself, so I'm going to throw even more at you, which is a plot summary. Loat is narrated by a working-class black trans femme named Matilda, who is squeaking by on the edges of London until she manages to scam her way into an academic artist's residency, where she encounters a group known as the Grovians, who are essentially Neo-Lusians. As she explains, quote, all the residents were trying to pair themselves into a state of scraped, traditionally mask flatness, mask as in masculine, to ward off beauty and romance and all attendant horrors, end quote. So I think the diction here is really crucial, pairing and scraping, because it implies, rather paradoxically, of course, that ornamentation is the natural or original state, and that plainness actually requires work. As Matilda describes one of the residents in particular, quote, hers was an eye free of all glitter, proudly delusion-proof, end quote. So obviously the glitter here is conceptual, right, not literal. And in my classes, as well as in the book, I talk about glitter as an effect, as a concept, as a verb, rather than just a noun or physical object. And that kind of gets us back into Krista Thompson's idea of privileging effects over the things themselves. Here and elsewhere, Loat gives delusion a positive gloss, framing it as a working class and queer survival strategy as well as a form of creativity. So as you read through the book, you realize that her being a scam artist, like emphasis might be on the artist part, right? That she is actually an artist by scamming her way into an artist residency. Nonetheless, recounting her heretofore grim childhood, she reports that when she met a kindred spirit in her best friend Malachi, she knew that, quote, unused froth and frivolity would finally be uncorked in us. The classic impetus of working class queer kids fleeing the conformity and violence of a literal or metaphorical small town, seeking queer and glittering new horizons, so there's glitter as an effect again, was turned into something else. Our escapes sent into overdrive, end quote. Meaning that the pair essentially begins to hallucinate better realities for themselves. We see this, for instance, during her residency, when Matilda describes how, she's talking about another character named Erskine Lilly, don't worry about that person for now. She describes how at night we swanned all about the town, which had become more palatial, more of a pleasure ground, amplified by Erskine Lilly's painting of it as much as my own will to envisage it as such, end quote. So I'm really struck here by the agency implied by the term will, as well as the aesthetic diction there. So painting as a synonym for imagining, of course. So one of the things I did was to teach this novel with an emphasis on beauty, aesthetics, indulgence, and pleasure, which, as you can probably tell by now, are the main themes of the book. On the first day, I asked students to come in wearing something that they thought was beautiful, or with an object that they considered beautiful. I also bought them ube cake, which I had personalized to the title, title of the book. All sorts of other treats. I played music. I considered bringing in candles, and then I was like, that's creepy. And also, like, I might get, fired, burn the place down. The point here, even though this might sound kind of silly or patronizing, is that it seemed crucial to capture the glittery spirit of the novel. Not to mention the fact that my students have demanding jobs outside school, often care for family members, and in the case of this class in particular, might be dealing with homophobia or transphobia while living at home, which most of our students do. So I definitely felt like at least one day, or 75 minutes of froth and frivolity, to use Matilda's phrase, was highly deserved. Another approach I took was not to not assume that students knew certain things related to this novel, like definitions of words or historical allusions, and to make the process of discovery pleasurable and communal. So for another day, I asked them to come in with a word that they thought sounded beautiful or looked beautiful, whether they knew what it meant or not, and then we looked it up together. And two examples that jump to mind from the novel are deliquesce and effleureste. And I still maintain that you don't need to know what those words mean to capture their vibe or catch their vibe. I also asked students to find an historical allusion that they didn't recognize. And then we did Google images of those allusions together, looking at everyone from Josephine Baker to Louisa Casati on the right to Richard Bruce Nugent. So I actually did not know about Louisa Casati before. I didn't know about the fountain dress until I read this novel, and that was something my students and I talked about, is how could we not know about this? This is like the greatest dress ever made, and we don't know about it. And I should also explain that Matilda, the character, calls people like this, people who are her obsessions and inspirations, she calls them transfictions. At the same time, I think it's important to honor the knowledge that students already have, and to highlight how their non-academic experiences are relevant to our readings and discussions. So we talked briefly about the Mexican feminist movement in relation to my glitter excerpts, since many of them have family currently in Mexico. And we also talked about the concept of rascuache in relation to the glitter book, as well as in relation to Lotte. Natasha Lopez tells us, drawing on the work of Tomas Ibarra Frausto, that, quote, rascuache is an art form and sensibility that originates from the Chicano working class, and that can be traced back to indigenous knowledges and practices. The word is originally from the Nahuatl language, meaning poor or vulgar. Lopez acknowledges that rascuache might be viewed as tacky, there's that word again, by abuelas or elitist art critics, but suggests that a better way to look at it might be as a byproduct of survival and resourcefulness. Making use of what we already have has always been a part of Chicano and Latinx cultures. She therefore concludes that while sustainability might not be at the center of rascuachismo, it is an inherent part of rascuache art. So if we look at this slide again, both of these pictures are from different rascuache art exhibits. And on the left, we see what look like takeout containers and paper plates, as well as glitter, of course, right? So this idea of reusing and recycling. So the point here is to highlight that students' experiences and backgrounds enable them to understand, possibly more than other readers, the themes and arguments of a novel like Lotte or a book like Glitter, even despite the obvious differences and distances, such as, for example, that Lotte focuses on a Black British person. More specifically, given Lopez's points about sustainability, such an approach might help students and all of us to disaggregate tackiness in the figurative sense from trashiness in the literal sense. So to call this trashy is a little strange when we consider that this is reusing waste rather than throwing it away, right? So ultimately, the learning goals in pairing glitter with Lotte were, I thought maybe I had a slide for this. I don't. Okay, so the learning goals in pairing my book Glitter with this novel Lotte were, number one, to identify and think through aesthetic hierarchies, including the notion of tackiness in terms of class and race, as well as gender and sexuality. Number two, to consider disavowals of ornamentation as possibly disingenuous, as expressions of privilege and or as oppressive. Number three, to reframe working class survival as an act of creativity, artistry, and or sustainability. And number four, to create what von Reinhold calls another space. And to explain that, when Matilda, the protagonist and narrator, is briefly stricken with self-conscious horror at the idea that she herself may have internalized or be seeking to assimilate to dominant European beauty ideals. So, for example, in the same way that we might say that non-noble people trying to wear those metallic threads in the 1500s were trying to be more like the reigning nobility. Her best friend Malachi comforts her, and he convinces her that, quote, there was another space, which was not about championing the thing that speaks against you, but instead about showing your ability to embody the fantasy regardless, in spite of, to spite, and in doing so, extrapolate the elegance, the fantasy, romance. Abstract it and show it as a universal material to be added to the toolbox. Look, and this is him speaking directly, look, it does not belong to them. Maybe we should not want it because they have weaponized it, but it was not theirs in the first place. And I think that's, I was going to say a good place to end because I'm out of time. I'm technically at 36 minutes, but I'm going to stop there anyway. So thank you very much for listening, and I think we have lots of time for questions. Yeah.
Nicole, thank you so much. You are right. We have time for questions. And why don't you stay up here and I will like float around, or somebody will. Okay.
softballs. I'll take softballs. Yes, that's good.
But I wonder if in the first place, and I'm sure you've thought of this, but the reason glitter got so much attention and worked as clickbait was because of its tackiness.
Mm-hmm.
And, the fact that it's so pretty and visible and sticks to you. So as opposed to clothing or other like less tangible, less glittery or attractive.
Yeah, thanks. I definitely think there was kind of like a shock value built into it because, again, we do think of it as frivolous, and that seems like binaristic, right? Like, this frivolous thing is dangerous, and I think they were really trading on that. And, yeah, which, again, is not to say it's not dangerous, just to be clear. I think plastic is bad. But, yeah, just thinking about the larger picture, and yeah, so you're absolutely right. I mean, the economics of clickbait journalism, like, people wouldn't want to read that story if it said, you know, all of your clothing is bad for the environment. People would be like, great, no, I have to be naked, you know, like what's for sure. And then the thing about the beauty, I think that goes along with the irony too, although not everyone considers glitter beautiful, right? So some people think it's lower class and it's tacky rather than beautiful. But yeah, I think that plays into this like shock value as well. Like, oh, you think you think this thing is so beautiful. Well, actually it's terrible. And to me, that was just like this classic, I don't know, I could go a little deeper for a second, which is, I think there's this like gotcha environmentalism that happens a lot where there's this famous vegan line where people say, if slaughterhouses had glass walls, no one would eat meat. So I think there's this idea of like, oh, you're working at a deficit. There's something you don't know. And once I tell you that, like, you know, there'll be this shock value. And that's kind of like not how things work. I think we would just like take another route rather than walking past the slaughterhouse, right? We have our ways of solving that. But anyway, this is to say, yeah, I think that I agree with you that this story is traded on this kind of like shock value, or here's something you didn't know. And I make this joke in the book that I'm surprised that the headlines didn't use that like truly clickbait language, like these, like, you'll never believe these like 21 tricks to like get rid of glitter or whatever. But yes, okay, I'm just babbling at this point. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I love this talk, and I have not read your book yet, but aspire to very soon. So I actually thought I had to go to another lecture, but really loved your lecture so much that I walked out of the building and walked right back in. So I may have missed this.
Wow.
I was a little late for the other lecture, but I may have missed this. So as an art historian, I want to ask you an art historical question or sort of art critical question, but I also have another question or comment. The art historical question is, what about the discourses of kitsch and camp, and how do they play into your wonderful thinking about glitter, if at all? Not saying, not citing that as a lack, just curious what your thoughts are. And then the observation has to do with the quality of glitter that I think is implicit in all you've said, but the hypervisibility of glitter. So the idea that as a reflective, you know, and sort of the way it catches light and reflects light, and so that it makes whatever it's is carrying it hyper visible in a way that so there you go. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So for sure, I kind of have these ideas of kitchen camp in the back of my mind. I'm actually working on a new project on conservative camp and conservative kitsch. We shouldn't talk about that. It's weird. But yes, that's definitely in the back of my mind. And also just this definition of what those things are. I think what I'm trying to get at is that they're contextual, right? Whereas like one person is wearing glitter and it's like, oh, that's fine. Another person's wearing glitter and suddenly it's too much, right? If someone has curly hair and they're white, okay. And someone has curly hair and they're black. Oh, wow, you have really crazy hair. And so, yeah, I think like what gets counted as kitschy or campy, or what gets counted as too much is always contextual. And actually this does come back to Sontag, I was reading Susan Sontag. Susan Sontag wrote this essay after Notes on Camp called Fascinating Fascism, where she says Cynthia and I have been talking about this, she says basically like 15 years later that she thinks that there's like no moral solidity to camp, and that's like why it could go in the direction of fascism, because it's always about context. And I'm gesturing at Cynthia because Cynthia's starting an NWSA panel on camp that we're going to do later this year. And just thinking about, camp in 1964 obviously had a different context than it did in 1980 when she writes this essay, right? So kind of like reassessing camp and thinking of it as contextual in the moment when we're calling something camp, but also thinking of how that context changes throughout time is something I'm really interested in. And then your question about the quality of glitter, its hypervisibility. I didn't talk about this, so you didn't miss this, but I'm really interested in like the way that glitter requires multiple different actors. So there has to be the person who's wearing it, but also the person who's perceiving it, and you're only perceiving it in a particular way if the light is there, right? So there's like this like three-way situation. And I guess to me, I mean, I'm always thinking those moments where like someone turns and like you see that, you see that sparkle coming off their brooch or whatever. Where am I going with this? I think to me that's also sort of like part of the communal politics of glitter is that it requires multiple actors, right? It's not something that like exists in and of itself or is perceived as glitter in and of itself. Also something I talk about in the book is that glitter was a verb long before it was a noun. So I got to do some like fun etymological stuff. So this idea of like glittering is this capacity or this quality as opposed to this actual object. And again, it depends on the context. It depends on like where you're sitting, where you're looking, where the light's coming in. And so, if we were to go back to this political question, I think it's all about like, the communal as opposed to the individual. Thank you.
Did you have any pushback on this? Because I was quoting someone who said they were coming, but I don't see them here. So if they are here and I'm quoting you, I'm sorry. But somebody asked, why are you bringing somebody who's going to talk about the positive qualities of glitter? And isn't it much better that like places like the EU have banned glitter? So obviously I explained to this person that the whole issue was much more complex as you have laid out for us, but have you had pushback? And this is a very softball question.
A little bit. I think so I interviewed a lot of art teachers, friends who are art teachers and friends who are parents, like a lot of them said, no, it's not about those things, it's not about racism or homophobia. If you had children, you would understand. If you were a teacher, you would understand that I hate glitter. So I have to acknowledge those people. But also, I think that I think what's interesting is we were talking about this in the panel earlier today. I definitely believe that glitter can and should be plastic. I think that glitter has been so many other things, right? The fact that glitter, like as a verb, obviously did not refer to an object. I think glitter has so many possibilities when we think about it as an affect or an effect. So what could it be? It could be all these different things. And one of the I'm just going off on a tangent, but one of the things that I thought was really interesting when I was reading some of the descriptions of these eco-glitters and biodegradable and non-plastic and non-aluminum glitters is they kind of talked about the trade-offs. So it won't be as reflective. So maybe the glitter won't actually glitter as much if it doesn't have aluminum. Maybe the glitter won't actually stick as much if it doesn't have plastic. But then you think about the trade-offs. So one company was talking about how their glitter without aluminum is softer, so it doesn't like slice your cheeks, right? And so, I don't know why you made me think of this, but yes, there has been some pushback, and I know what it was. I just want to be really clear. I'm a glitter apologist. I'm not a plastic apologist. So glitter can be whatever you want it to be.